This timing belt looked seriously sketchy to me. It had only done 75,000 miles and was 6.5 years old. Service say it should last 112,500 or 10 years, but judging by the cracks in it, whether this is to do with it being in oil, I don't know. It just looks so worn out to me. I would be interested to know why the condition of the belt seems so poor. Whether it's down to lack of oil changes when the car was new, I don't know. Peugeot servicing suggests oil change at 1 year or 12,500 miles. Maybe these modern engines with the belt in oil would benefit from a service interval of 8,000 miles maybe. Presumably the older the oil is, the more contaminants it will have, maybe acids and the such, that actually will attack the belt and cause early failure. Showing where the flywheel locking pin goes. I found the flywheel locking pin didn't just slot in. I had to clean the hole a bit because it had oxidised over the years, and then once the pin was pushed in, it would hit the flywheel, and as you rotated the engine in a clockwise direction, you would sort of sense, and then it would go quiet where the hole was, and then you could gradually work the pin in. Fitting the camshaft locking tool. You can use 2 of the cylinder head cover bolts to hold this in position. Cam locking bracket. The bracket should just drop in if it's all aligned correctly. Two of the rocker bolts. You can hold the bracket in position using 2 of the head cover bolts using an 8mm socket. 8mm socket. And then tighten the Allen bolt in the middle. Bit of an overall view of the camshaft locking tool in position. Please note that it does need to be bolted in. Please note the timing marks on the two dephasers and the two indentations that are at the 5 o'clock position. Note timing marks there, and the same again over there. Also position of the two dephasers. Not strictly necessary, but I like to add a couple of marks on the old timing belts to show the markings of where the belt was on the cams. I then transfer those marks to the new belt, counting them tooth by tooth. Using a 13mm socket, we will now remove the crankshaft pulley. I have already removed the accessory drive belt and locked the pulley in position with an Allen key. 13mm. I had already broken these bolts with a breaker bar. That's the 3 bolts out. Pulley just pulls off. You can see the water pump with the stretch belt still hanging on it. That's the water pump belt. Worth checking that the water pump spins without any bearing noise. Now to remove the timing belt tensioner cover, 4 bolts, 10mm socket. This is 10mm. Some oil will leak out when the cover has been removed. That's 4 bolts. Note the rubber seal as the cover comes off. The tensioner pointer seems to show that the belt has gone slack. Now to remove the tensioner and the guide pulley using a 10mm socket. Using 10mm, remove tensioner. Out comes the tensioner. And the guide pulley. Remove the crankshaft pinion and drive gear using an 18mm socket, being very careful not to damage the seal when withdrawing the drive gear. Okay. 18mm. This is the part where you do need to be careful with that rubber seal. Note the peg and the keyway on the crankshaft. Here is a photo to show the keyway where the peg goes on the left of the crankshaft. Just zooming in there, and you can see it on the left there. Using an E14 Torx socket, remove the inlet and exhaust dephasers from the camshafts. Okay, removing the two dephasers. E14. This is the inlet dephaser, which is marked with IN. Clearly marked inlet. Note peg and keyway on the dephaser. Note EX is on the dephaser for exhaust. And exhaust. Again note the keyway and the peg. Key. And now to remove the belt. Showing the extra paint marks, I copy over to the new timing belt. Now to install the new timing belt, noting any direction of rotation. I used a belt installation tool to help push the belt down towards the crankshaft. This did seem to make it a bit easier. Now to insert the crankshaft, pinion and drive gear. At first I did try putting the drive gear in on its own, but felt really uneasy that it could have been dropped into the sump. So I then mounted the two back together and pushed them in as one piece. Note that peg and where it's got to go in the crankshaft. Again, being very careful here because of that rubber seal. You may need to buy a new seal if you damage the old one. There is a little indentation at 3 o'clock to show that at 9 o'clock that's where the peg is. Now to install the tensioner and guide pulleys. Guide pulley going in first. $10mm socket. $10mm. When installing the dynamic tensioner, ensure that the Allen key bolt hole is around the 12 o'clock position. Then tighten finger tight using a 10mm socket. Note the position of the Allen key hole. Now to install the two dephasers. Installing the exhaust dephaser first. Note the timing marks at 5 o'clock and then the keyway should line up. Then tighten with the E14 Torx. Then install the inlet dephaser as you did for the exhaust, noting the 5 o'clock position again. If you marked the new belt as I have, then you should note that those two yellow marks will line up again. Using E14 Torx again to tighten. Here you can clearly see the two dephasers at the 5 o'clock position and the yellow dots all lining up. When tightening the two dephasers, I personally would check with Peugeot and see what their recommendations are. The information I got online was tighten initially to 20 Newton meters and then a further angled tighten of 120 degrees. But this information was from a data service for the auto trade, and Peugeot service may have updated figures on this. So the initial 20 Newton meters, and then the angle tighten of 120 degrees. Turned out to require more effort than I anticipated, that 120 degrees. Almost seemed excessively tight. Using a 6mm Allen key, apply the tension to the dynamic tensioner. Don't put the key in too far, it only needs to go in a short distance, otherwise it may get engaged in the back of the mechanism. Then tighten these two bolts to 20 Newton meters. Tightening the guide pulley to 20 Newton meters. .6mm Allen key. 6mm. Just pushed in as far as it needs to be, just to cover the steel plate. Once the orange pointer is showing the correct tension in the middle, you can then tighten that at 20 Newton meters with your torque wrench. Here's a photo to show where the tensioner position should be. Now to tighten the crankshaft bolt using an 18mm socket. Tighten initially to 50 Newton meters using a torque wrench, and then a further angle tighten of 180 degrees. I'd still confirm these figures with Peugeot service if possible. 50. Now to angle tighten. I was surprised at how hard it was to actually apply 180 degrees to the crankshaft nut. Rightly or wrongly, I took it to 150 degrees and shied away from full 180 for fear of the bolt snapping. I then rotated the engine by hand for a couple of revolutions just to ensure no valves and pistons were hitting each other. Then the moment of truth.
Thank you for watching, and I hope this video will help others as much as YouTube and its members have helped me over the years. This video was made and edited by Mark Savage in April 2019.